When the Howard government was voted out of office, its much maligned work choices policy was a key factor in the minds of voters. Once again, come September, industrial relations is set to be one of the big issues that determines how Australians vote. On one side, the government and unions are keen to revive the spectre of a return to Howard-era style laws. On the other side, the coalition and business leaders are slamming the government's proposed changes to the Fair Work laws, saying they continue a pattern of pandering to the unions. Political editor Chris Ullman reports.
Workplace relations is the ghost that haunts the coalition.
I'm very proud of what we did in the area of industrial relations, very proud.
But parts of the Howard-era regime after 2004 dramatically overreached, allowing bosses to offer contracts that cut wages and conditions and letting businesses with less than 100 employees sack people without the risk of being charged with unfair dismissal.
Once they got office, particularly once they got control of the Senate, they then imposed work choices onto the community.
The union movement's furious response forced the government back down before the 2007 election.
Putting big business before working people.
But it was too late. During the 2010 election, Tony Abbott was still trying to kill work choices.
Work choices is dead, buried, cremated.
And 3 years on, it lingers as a hurdle between him and victory in September.
Nobody's calling for a return to work choices.
Tony Abbott, as a cabinet minister, spoke against work choices.
We're more concerned about what they're not saying than what they are going to say.
Right now, the opposition's policy is little more than a set of dot points.
We see three issues under the Fair Work Act: the militancy issue, the productivity issue and the flexibility issue, and those three areas will be addressed in our policy.
Business is convinced the coalition will win government in September and is pushing it hard to commit to changing the Fair Work Act. There's also an outcry against proposed workplace laws it believes Labor's written to curry favour with the union movement.
We can identify about 157 different proposals that have occurred through the Fair Work Act when it was first introduced and since, which are very clearly pro-union, 157 pro-union amendments and not one that assists employers in any demonstrable way.
The Workplace Relations Minister dismisses the claim.
We are trying to make sure that we have flexible workplaces, family-friendly workplaces. I get the right of the employer groups, trade unions for employers, to make their points. That's really necessary in a democracy. But one thing we won't do is allow some employer groups to force us back to the work choices era, which I think some of them miss.
Australia's miners hope the coalition's IR policy will foreshadow significant change, beginning with crimping union right of entry to work sites.
We have no objection to unions coming onto site, provided that there are a reasonable number of them and that the frequency is reasonable.
There's also a demand to limit the scope of enterprise bargaining.
You can have a dispute about whether or not a union official gets a mobile phone from the company or access to the company's IT arrangements or a union picnic day to go and get their members together once a year.
And Steve Knott says the law now allows unions to frustrate the development of new projects.
Under the previous legislation, if you couldn't reach agreement with the unions, you could actually go and register an agreement with the Industrial Tribunal. Under the new laws, you can't do that, so the unions have all the power.
Small business wants changes to a penalty rate regime it says is out of kilter with the demands of a 24/7 economy.
And what we have now is a situation where employers, on many occasions, simply cannot afford to pay staff the penalty rates that are being demanded by the union movement.
The coalition feels industry's pain.
We as a coalition are looking in relation to the right of entry issues and will be announcing our policy in due course. Labor's Fair Work Act does in fact allow strike first, talk later, and I've highlighted that as an issue of concern. Clearly, it is within the national interest to ensure that new projects can go ahead expeditiously.
But so far, that's it. Business complaints are mounting, but the opposition's industrial relations policy is a string of concerns without solutions.
And there are other areas of concern that I have enunciated in a variety of speeches, and we'll be bringing all that together in our policy announcement in due course.
Business frets the Coalition's response to its long list of complaints will be a timid affair, especially on the once totemic Liberal issue of individual agreements, because in an effort to present as small a target as possible, everything will be framed within Labor's Fair Work Act.
As far as we're concerned, individual flexibility is important, but within the parameters of the Labor Party's legislation and at all times subject to Labor's Better Off Overall test.
Unions say the Coalition's policy will be a facade that hides its real intent. Members have already been levied to build a $4 million war chest for another election year assault.
Well, we are gearing up for a major campaign around the issues that matter to workers, and right around this country now we've got unions out there that are campaigning on their issues.
It's a fight the Coalition is expecting.
No matter what I announce, no matter what Tony Abbott announces, the union movement will be against it.
But on two issues the Coalition has been explicit, reinstating the building industry watchdog and subjecting union officials to the same rules as company directors.
To have a specialist organisation within Fair Work that will monitor the way trade unions spend their money to ensure that the health services union rip-offs can't occur in the future.
This just shows that despite what he's saying out there, the ideology is still there, the same ideology that underpinned work choices.
Look at that.
The Coalition believes it was abandoned by business during the work choices fight, so it won't be taking any risks on business's behalf. So it might propose changes to a union's right of entry and enterprise bargaining, but not to penalty rates or individual contracts. But we won't have to wait long. The battle lines on this fight will be drawn soon.
But the precise time, I'm afraid I'll have to prolong your frustration.